The king woke up one morning, only to find an old and ugly woman lying beside him. Disgusted, he immediately summoned his guards. Without hesitation, he ordered them to throw the woman out of the window. It all began just a few days earlier. When the king went out for a stroll, he was suddenly drawn by a distant, enchanting singing voice. Following the sound along the castle wall, he made his way over. Below, he spotted a young woman singing sweetly. The king instantly believed she must be a stunning beauty. In that very moment, he found himself captivated by her. But as soon as she noticed him, the woman rushed back inside and hid. But the king was far from giving up. He returned to the palace and brought out a pearl necklace. He instructed his guards to deliver it to the home beneath the castle wall, where the girl supposedly lived. Strangely, the young maiden the king remembered never appeared. Instead, the house was occupied by two elderly sisters. When they saw the luxurious necklace sent by the king, the younger sister urged her older sister to tell the king the truth. But Sally, the elder sister, refused to listen. That very night, the king arrived and knocked on their door. The loud and violent banging instantly frightened the two sisters. The younger one tried to confess the truth, but Sally stopped her on the spot. Hearing the sweet and innocent voice from inside the house, the king grew even more agitated and impatient. Sally remained calm. She told her sister not to miss this once-in-a-lifetime chance at wealth and glory. Then, using a falsetto voice, she spoke to the king through the door. She claimed she needed a few days to prepare herself properly. She asked the king to give her 7 days. After that, she would present herself to him. The king, upon hearing this, was instantly overjoyed. He returned to the palace, full of excitement. But once he was gone, Sally began to worry. She knew that if the king discovered the truth in 7 days, punishment would be inevitable. Still, she didn't panic at all. She brewed a pot of collagen-rich broth. Then she smeared it all over her fingers. Finally, she wrapped her hands in white cloth. She believed that in a few days, her fingers would become as smooth and youthful as a maiden's. But when the 7 days were over and she unwrapped the bandages, she was horrified to find her fingers were still as wrinkled as ever. Just then, the king knocked on the door once again. It turned out the 7 days had already passed. Realizing that the truth was about to be exposed, Sally quickly grabbed her sister and extended her sister's hand out the door. When the king saw those slender, delicate fingers, he immediately believed there must be a beautiful woman inside. Unbeknownst to him, the sister had a habit of sucking her fingers, which left them soft and baby smooth. At that moment, the king invited Sally to the castle the next day. From inside the house, Sally quickly agreed, but she made one additional request. There must be no light at all during her arrival at the palace. Surprisingly, the king accepted her condition without hesitation. The next day, Sally was determined to have smooth, youthful skin like a young maiden. So she used glue to pull and stick her sagging skin together. The ripping pain made her entire body convulse, but she endured it without backing down. That night, just as promised, the king ordered all the candles in the palace to be blown out. Sally wrapped herself tightly from head to toe. Then, under the cover of darkness, she slipped quietly into the king's chambers. To her surprise, the drunken king didn't notice anything unusual at all. When the king woke up the next morning, he was horrified to find an 80-year-old woman lying beside him. Furious, he threw open the window and ordered his guards to toss Sally off the cliff immediately. Luckily, the bedsheet wrapped around Sally caught on a tree branch, saving her life. At that moment, a passing witch spotted Sally and gently helped her down from the tree. Then, using her magic, the witch cast a spell over Sally's wrinkled body. To Sally's astonishment, her deep lines and sagging skin began to vanish. Within moments, she was transformed into a fair-skinned young maiden. After the witch disappeared into the forest, the king happened to arrive on the mountain to go hunting. There, he laid eyes on the radiant young woman before him. Instantly, he was utterly enchanted. Little did he know, this breathtaking beauty was the very same Sally he had thrown off a cliff just that morning. 2 days later, a royal guard delivered a gown to Sally's sister. He said it was a personal invitation from the future queen to attend the royal wedding. On the day of the ceremony, the sister sat nervously in a corner, trying not to draw attention. That's when the queen suddenly pulled her aside. She leaned in close and revealed she was actually Sally. She explained that somehow she had woken up in a new, youthful body, but there was one condition: no one could ever know they were sisters. She urged her sister to keep the secret, saying it was the only way they could both live happily ever after. But the very next moment, the sister forgot everything Sally had said. She went around excitedly bragging to everyone, telling them that the queen was actually her sister. Fortunately, no one believed a word of it. To everyone else, it just sounded like a ridiculous fantasy. Things got even more troublesome after the banquet ended. Sally's sister refused to leave the palace. With no other choice, Sally pulled her aside and told her the only way they could keep their wealth and status was if she left quietly. But her sister stubbornly refused and insisted on staying. Sally had no choice but to forcefully kick her out. However, it wasn't long before the sister returned once again. She claimed she just wanted to live with her sister. Her unreasonable behavior deeply irritated Sally. Frustrated, she told her, "You're too old. No one would ever believe we're sisters." The sister begged to know how Sally had become young again, but Sally herself had no idea how it had happened. Annoyed, she blurted out without thinking, "I peeled off my skin." Just then, the king unexpectedly returned. Sally hurried to hide her sister inside the wardrobe, but right in the middle of Sally and the king being intimate, her sister walked out in front of them. The king was furious at the sight. He immediately called the guards to drag her out. The very next morning, the sister went to find a barber. She begged him to peel off her skin, because she truly believed Sally's angry outburst. She thought that was the secret to becoming young again. The barber, thinking she was completely insane, refused and sent her away. But the sister was not about to give up so easily. She then tracked down a blade sharpener, and she offered him her jewelry as payment, begging him to flay the skin from her body. Then the two of them went out to the desolate wilderness, watching her master sharpen the blade nearby. She wasn't afraid, in fact. She felt a strange sense of anticipation. Soon after, screams echoed through the air. Not long after, she walked back to the palace, covered in blood. She believed that this was the way she could be with her sister Sally forever. But little did she know, she had become a walking skeleton. Her life had come to an end. Ultimately, she died consumed by her own obsession. Meanwhile, Sally began to notice something was wrong. Her hands started aging rapidly. The aging quickly spread throughout her entire body. In the end, she had no choice but to flee the palace. The second story takes place in another medieval kingdom. This king had a peculiar obsession. He liked to keep fleas as pets. At first, the flea was only the size of a sesame seed. The king personally fed it with his own flesh and blood. Over time, the flea grew bigger and bigger, eventually strong enough to pull a toy cart. As its appetite grew larger, the king switched to feeding it fresh meat. Gradually, the flea grew to the size of a hen. But then, things suddenly took a turn for the worse. The king called for doctors late at night. When the doctors saw the flea, they were startled. The creature was even bigger than a sow. After diagnosis, they found that the flea was beyond cure. The king was heartbroken, staying by its side through the entire night. At this time, the princess had also reached the age to be married, so the king ordered a flea's skin to be hung up publicly. He announced to the whole kingdom, whoever could guess what this skin belonged to would marry the princess. To win the princess's hand, all kinds of people flooded the palace, but none of them guessed correctly, until a wild man appeared, and the guards immediately stopped him. However, the king declared that everyone had the right to participate. Although the princess was very disgusted, the king was certain no one could guess the answer. The wild man stepped forward and sniffed the skin. Then he immediately gave the correct answer. Hearing the answer, the king was stunned speechless. The princess refused to accept the reality. Running out of the palace, she absolutely refused to marry the wild man, even threatening to take her own life. But the king's promise could not be taken back. To preserve the king's authority, the princess had no choice but to submit. The princess obediently left the palace with the wild man. They traveled through dense forests and crossed rugged mountains. Eventually, they arrived at the wild man's cave. Inside, the floor was covered with countless skeletons. The princess trembled in fear. All around them were steep cliffs, leaving no hope of escape. Desperate, the princess spent her days weeping. One day, the wild man went out hunting. Suddenly, the princess heard noises outside. She spotted a woman sitting across the deep, bottomless cliff. Quickly, she called out for help, but the woman, after observing, said she was powerless to assist. After the princess's repeated pleas, the woman finally agreed to send her son to rescue her the next day. The next day, the woman kept her promise. While the wild man was not paying attention, her son carried the princess across a tightrope to the other side. The wild man, with his keen sense of smell, suddenly caught their scent. He rushed out just in time to see what was happening. Using his brute strength, he hung onto the tightrope and chased after them desperately. Fortunately, the princess and the others reached the other side first. The man quickly pulled out a knife and cut the rope. In the nick of time, they escaped from the wild man's grasp. On the way back with the princess, everyone chatted and laughed, enjoying themselves, but no one expected that the wild man hadn't fallen to his death and had caught up with them. Furious, the wild man's fighting ability exploded. The woman and her son successfully escaped with the princess, while the others were instantly killed by the wild man. As the wild man closed in step by step, they hid behind a shelter, preparing to ambush him when he was off guard, but they underestimated the wild man's strength. He extinguished the fire on his body and directly tackled the man to the ground. Seeing this, the princess quickly fled for her life, but the wild man pursued relentlessly. He soon caught up to her. Just as the wild man was about to assault her, the princess cleverly softened her stance. Admitting her mistakes and promising to obey him from now on, the wild man's anger gradually faded. He signaled for the princess to climb onto his back, letting down his guard. He did not expect the princess to betray him. In the end, the princess successfully broke free from her bonds and returned to the palace with her husband. The king felt deeply guilty about this. To make amends for his daughter, he soon passed the throne to her. From then on, the princess became the master of her own destiny.